Hope was easiest to preach from a safe hearth and hardest to hold in a hunted body. Arabella had learned that truth in layers, first when her husband's pyre went cold, then when condolences turned into calculations, and finally, when the ritual that promised protection became a marketplace where men measured women for advantage. The temple of the moon goddess rose around her in pale stone and silver fire, all sanctity and law, yet the circle tonight smelled of fear dressed as incense. A woman could stand under sacred light and still be weighed like cargo. A woman carrying an heir could still be called expendable. Arabella stood in widow black at the edge of the choosing ring, one hand braced beneath the curve of her belly, shoulders rigid against a tremor she refused to show. Her hem was still crusted with marsh silt. Cedar needles clung to her braid. The lash marks across her back burned beneath borrowed linen every time she drew breath too deeply, and she had to choose each inhale with care. Around her, unmarried lunas in jeweled veils stood in a crescent, perfumed and composed, pretending not to look at her. They looked anyway. The first alpha approached with his escort, broad-shouldered and gold-cloaked, eyes sweeping across the line of women. He paused at Arabella only long enough for his nose to wrinkle. "Widow," he said to the officiant, as if she were an error in a ledger, and carrying another line, "Pass." The officiant bowed. "As you wish." The second gave a tight smile that never reached his eyes. "I need alliance, not scandal." The third did not even speak to her. He asked, loudly enough for all to hear, "Why is she in the primary ring?" A murmur traveled the hall like wind through dead reeds. Arabella kept her gaze on the moon sigil carved into the floor so she would not have to watch each rejection land. Heat climbed her throat anyway. Shame was a strange wound, clean and sharp and endless. Terror sat beneath it, older, heavier, patient. Not now. Her thoughts raced in the raw present tense that came whenever panic took her by the spine. Not here. Hold your face still. Do not fold. They want to see you fold. Breathe in for 4. Breathe out for 4. The baby is quiet. Too quiet. No. There. A small turn under your palm. Good. Stay steady. Keep the satchel close. If they strip you for search, you bite and run. If Fenris's men are in the crowd, you do not look at them. If no one claims sanctuary, you go to the altar and invoke maternal blood right anyway. You speak every name, even if your voice shakes, especially if it shakes. A pair of temple attendants whispered near the pillar, careless with cruelty. She should have stayed hidden. Fenris Starfall said she is unstable from grief. He also said she carries a cursed issue. The word issue hollowed her out more than any insult. Not a child, not a life, a complication to be managed. She tightened her hand over her belly until her knuckles blanched. The baby answered with a small kick that felt like insistence. At the far side of the ring, a gray-haired council elder tapped his staff for silence. "Proceed. The moon is high. No delays." Another alpha entered, then another. One offered a shallow incline of his head and said, almost apologetically, "I will not invite feud with Starfall Regency." He moved on. That name, Starfall, split the present open and dragged her backward. 2 nights earlier, in the border keep that had once been her home, Fenris had received mourners in the great room while her husband's scent still clung to the stair rail. He had wept at the right moments. He had accepted condolences with his hand over his heart. He had called her niece in front of witnesses, daughter in grief, and spoke of duty with polished sorrow. Then he sent everyone away, locked the solar door, and laid 3 documents on the table. "Sign," he said, sliding a seal stick toward her. "Temporary guardianship until delivery. You are in no state to manage a border command." Arabella had read the first line, then the second, then felt cold spread through her limbs. It was not temporary. It transferred military authority, treasury rights, and custodianship of her unborn child to Fenris as acting regent, indefinitely. This is theft. This is order, he replied. Raider season is coming. Men follow strength. Men followed my husband. And your husband is dead. The words had not been loud. They did not need to be. He leaned back in her mate's carved chair and studied her belly as if examining livestock. Do not make me force this. Quiet compliance keeps you comfortable. She had pushed the documents away. I will petition the temple. His smile thinned. You will attend the choosing as required by widow law. You will be placed. If claimed, you go where your claimant sends you. If unclaimed, custody defaults to your nearest male kin. Me. The room had gone very still. Even the hearth seemed to draw in. I am carrying House Darkhollow's heir. You are carrying leverage. That night, she did not sleep. By the third hour before dawn, she heard voices beneath her door and recognized Fenris's captain, Jorek, and a temple courier with reed-thin hands. Back ring position, the courier said. No advocate, no speaking rights unless requested. And if she resists? Jorek asked. Sedate her, Fenris answered from the corridor. Transport quietly. The babe must not become a banner. Arabella had gone numb first, then lucid in the way people did when the fire finally reached the room they were standing in. She pulled on boots without stockings, wrapped black wool over her nightdress, and took the narrow servant stair to the archive passage her husband once showed her during a rainstorm. Laughing because no one ever looked behind old maps. In the records niche, she found what Fenris had missed, a dispatch folio with his private seal, cracked in haste, and a payment ledger coded with hunting marks she recognized from border contracts. One entry matched the night of the ambush that killed her mate. Same route, same moon phase, triple payment labeled Cinder Ford. Her husband had ridden Cinder Ford and died there with half his guard. Hands shaking, she copied names, ripped out the 2 pages she needed, and wrapped them in oilskin. She took her husband's signet too, not as treasure but proof of line. As she slid the folio into her satchel, footsteps pounded above. Jorek was calling her name in a false tone of concern. Lady Arabella, please open. We are here to escort you to safety. Safety. The lie was almost elegant. She fled through the smokehouse gate, cutting her palm on rusted latchwork when it stuck. Rain started as a mist and turned to needles by the marsh road. She moved through black water up to her calves, breath tearing, one hand on her belly, one on the satchel strap. Twice she heard pursuit horns behind her. Once she crouched in cedar roots while riders passed so near she could smell horse sweat and pitch torches. Her back seized from old wounds and new strain. She bit her sleeve to keep from crying out. At dawn, she traded her last silver pin for passage on a grain cart. By dusk, she was walking again. On the second night, she vomited beside a mile marker and kept going anyway. On the third morning, the temple spires rose out of fog like pale teeth, and relief hit so hard she almost collapsed. Sanctuary had meant law, and law had meant witness. Witness had meant survival. Now, in the temple ring, Law looked away from her in embroidered cloaks. The final scheduled candidate, a coastal alpha with sea glass beads in his braid, stopped directly in front of her. For one strained heartbeat, she thought she saw conflict in his face. Then his advisor leaned close and whispered, "Starfall retaliation." He stepped back. "I decline." Humiliation and dread fused into a single hard point beneath Arabella's ribs. The hall blurred at the edges. She heard laughter from somewhere behind the Luna line, quickly muffled. The officiant raised his staff to close the rite. Then the great bronze doors opened. Cold night air poured in first, carrying pine smoke and steel. Boots struck stone in a measured rhythm that silenced every whisper in 3 steps. Alpha King Owen Starfall entered without herald, dark cloak unfastened, rain still silvering his shoulders. Men who would not bow to one another bowed to him. Even the council elder lowered his gaze. Arabella had seen him once from a distance at a treaty fire, all command and distance and rumored ruthlessness. Tonight he crossed the threshold and did not look at the jeweled crescent of waiting women, did not pause at the officiant, did not acknowledge the invitations rising toward him like practiced flowers. He walked past them all, straight toward her. Owen stopped within arm's reach, and the hall seemed to contract around that single distance, as if stone, torchlight, and breathing bodies had all bent toward the space between them. His scent reached her, pine smoke, iron, winter air, and something in her chest went tight and bright in the same instant, a precise internal strike she had no room to examine. Arabella had prepared herself for contempt, for pity, for calculated kindness that hid a trap. She had not prepared for a king to lower himself to one knee on sacred marble. He bowed his head, not deeply enough to perform, only enough to signal respect. "Arabella Darkhollow," he said, voice roughened by cold and restraint. "Do you request sanctuary under my protection?" The officiant made a startled noise. "Your Majesty, the choosing has procedure. She was declined by all registered candidates. The closing rite must be observed." Owen did not look away from her. "I did observe it." A few of the waiting lunas shifted, silk hissing against stone. The gray-haired elder tightened his hand on his staff. "You were not entered as candidate in this round." "Then record me now." Arabella's fingers dug into the satchel strap at her side. Starfall. The name still meant ambush smoke, forged papers, boots outside a locked door. Her pulse hammered so hard she could hear it over the crackle of braziers. He was Fenris's blood. Blood had become a blade in her life. Trust had become a luxury for women who were not carrying targets under their hearts. Yet Owen remained kneeling, waiting for her answer instead of taking one. No hand reached for her wrist. No order barked to attendants. He asked. She swallowed and heard her own voice come out thin but steady. "I request sanctuary witnessed by temple law." "Granted," he said immediately. Then, louder, to the chamber. "By crown right and moon law, she stands under my protection from this breath onward." The elder struck his staff once. "Protection does not erase protocol. Widow placement affects succession risk. The child's lineage remains disputed." Arabella felt heat rise to her face, humiliation arriving sharp and familiar. Owen rose in one controlled motion, and command rolled off him like pressure before a storm. "Disputed by whom?" "By any house with standing cause," the elder replied. "Given current rumor, caution is prudent." At that word rumor, anger flickered through Arabella so swiftly it nearly steadied her. Rumor. Fenris had turned murder into procedure and terror into caution. She moved half a step forward, and Owen shifted with her, not blocking, simply aligning. "My husband was ambushed at Cinder Ford," she said. "I carry records naming who paid for it." That landed. Quiet dropped hard. Several heads turned toward the satchel. The elder's gaze sharpened. "You bring accusation into a choosing right? I bring proof into any room that still respects witness law." Owen's head tilted slightly, attention fixing on her with new intensity, not disbelief, not curiosity, something older and more dangerous. "You have documents on your person now?" "Yes." "Then you are not sleeping in temple quarters tonight." A temple adjudicator stepped forward in pale robes. "The temple can secure evidence." Arabella laughed once, a brittle sound she did not mean to make. "Can it? One of your couriers negotiated my sedation in a corridor 2 nights ago." Shock flared across two faces nearest to the pillar. The adjudicator stiffened. "Name this courier." "Later, under seal, in front of a scribe who cannot be bought." By the time the moon reached the highest aperture in the dome, the chamber had turned from ritual theater into political fault line. Owen signaled with 2 fingers. 6 of his guard detached from the perimeter shadows, wolves in human skin by scent and stillness. They took stations without touching anyone, yet the route from Arabella to the bronze doors became clear. She should have felt safer with a wall of warriors around her. Instead, fear sharpened. Protection could become custody with a signature and a locked room. She had lived that truth already. As if he read the calculation in her face, Owen angled his body so she could see his hands, both open at his sides. "You walk out beside me," he said quietly, "not behind me. If you refuse, I do not move you." The restraint in that sentence unsettled her more than a command might have. Men with absolute power usually used it to erase negotiation. He offered terms in front of everyone. She nodded once. Beside, he turned to the elder. "Record this clearly. Arabella Darkhollow departs under sovereign sanctuary pending tribunal. Any interference is treason to crown and temple both." The elder hesitated long enough to reveal fear, then struck his staff again. Recorded. They moved. Stone echoed under boots and soft slippers, under the rustle of cloaks, under the hiss of whispers trailing behind them like smoke. At the threshold, a woman in jeweled blue murmured to another, not quite softly enough. He chose scandal over stability. Owen stopped without turning. Stability built on silencing widows is rot, not order. No one answered. Cold air hit Arabella's face outside the doors, clean with pine and wet iron. Her knees trembled now that she was no longer on display. Torches lined the temple stairs, painting the night in gold and shadow, and beyond them waited a dark procession of riders, wagons, and 2 massive wolves pacing at the edges with disciplined, watchful eyes. Starfall Royal Guard, his people. Exhaustion came for her in a wave so sudden she swayed. Owen's hand lifted halfway, halted in midair, then lowered. "May I?" he asked. She gave a shaky nod. His fingers closed around her forearm, warm, careful, and the world changed again. The force that had first pierced her in the hall when he crossed into her scent surged into full, undeniable flood, like a drawn blade laid flat against her sternum, hot and exact. A line of searing recognition that ran upward into her throat and across into him, as if something invisible had finally found its matching notch. A breath later, cool relief poured through the same channel, spreading through her chest and belly in widening rings. The baby, restless for hours, settled. Not silence. Calm. A firm, deliberate ease that made tears spring to her eyes without warning. Owen inhaled sharply, the sound almost a flinch. Amber bled into his irises from the center out, thin at first, then vivid. His pupils widened until little remained, but that predatory brightness and the dark core of it. Muscle jumped along his jaw. The nails at his fingertips thickened, darkened, edging toward claw before he forced his hand open and curled it back into human shape with visible effort. Behind them, one of his captains whispered, "Moon witness." Arabella stared at Owen, unable to do anything else. She had known mating lore. Every child in every pack did. A scent that branded memory, a pull that bypassed reason, a recognition that felt less like meeting and more like remembering someone she had never seen. Stories made it sound holy. Standing in it felt like terror braided with awe. Not now, her mind said in raw present tense, spiraling. Not after Pyres. Not while his family hunts me. Not when my body still carries another man's child and grief has teeth and law can still turn this into a cage. Move your hand. Step back. Breathe. You are standing on temple steps with half the council watching and the king's fingers on your arm and your heart is trying to outrun your ribs. You cannot afford wonder. Wonder gets women killed. Look at the exits. Count guards. Keep the satchel. Keep your voice. Keep your child. Owen seemed to be waging his own internal war in full view of the night. His gaze dropped briefly to her belly, and the hard line of his mouth softened into something almost reverent, then tightened again as discipline returned. When he spoke, his voice carried only to her. I will not claim what you do not offer. The sentence pierced deeper than the bond's first strike. No demand, no triumphant declaration, no public possession to secure his pride. Choice again, placed in her hands while both of them shook under forces older than law. She realized she was still gripping his wrist. She loosened her fingers slowly, though the urge to hold on remained fierce and bewildering. What did you feel? She asked. He gave a humorless half-smile that lasted less than a heartbeat. Like being split open and steadied in the same breath. That was so close to her own sensation she almost laughed, almost sobbed. Instead, she nodded because speech had become unreliable terrain. A murmur rippled through the guards as the two wolves pacing the stairbase lifted their muzzles and went still, ears forward, acknowledging something none of them could deny now. One lowered itself to its forelegs in a gesture that looked uncomfortably like fealty. The other followed. Owen's captain dropped to one knee. My king, he said, voice tight with controlled shock. Orders? Owen did not break eye contact with Arabella. Fortress route locked, double outriders to the east ridge. No stops. The captain glanced once at Arabella, then bowed his head. At once. They descended the stairs together, still not touching. The night around them sharpened into detail under the force of what had happened. The resin bite of torch smoke, the damp bite of wind through torn wool, the metallic taste of fear lingering at the back of her tongue, the distant rush of river water below the temple cliffs. A carriage door opened. Owen waited for her to choose before entering. She stepped in first. Inside, lantern light swayed over dark leather and travel blankets. The satchel stayed in her lap, both hands over it now, reflex and oath in one. Owen sat opposite, knees braced, posture alert rather than relaxed. Even in confinement, he left space between them, a respectful gulf charged with invisible current. When the carriage jolted forward, Arabella's shoulder struck the wall. She hissed despite herself as pain flared across healing welts on her back. Owen's hands clenched on his thighs. Tell me what hurts, he said. Everything, she answered, then let out a breath that almost carried a laugh. That is not useful. My back most. I saw enough through the linen to know someone tried to teach obedience with a lash. She met his gaze sharply. Do not call me obedient. Something rough and admiring crossed his face. I would not survive that mistake. It was absurd, tiny, and so unexpectedly dry that a short sound escaped her. Half laugh, half disbelief. The tension in the carriage shifted from unlivable to merely taut. 3 hours later, when the moon had tilted west and frost began to silver the road edges, the Starfall fortress rose from the ridgeline ahead, black stone threaded with watchfires, banners snapping in the wind. Arabella had not meant to doze, but exhaustion dragged at her in brutal, uneven dips. Each time the wheels hit a rut, she woke with her heart pounding and fingers locked around the satchel. At the outer gate, horns sounded a low sequence. Portcullis chains groaned. Guard lines formed in disciplined ranks. Helmets bowed as the king's carriage rolled through. Arabella braced for stares, for curiosity sharpened into disdain. She got silence instead, precise and deliberate, as if Owen's people understood that witness could be a form of shelter when done with dignity. The carriage stopped inside the inner court. Owen stepped down first, then looked up at her without offering to lift her, waiting. She gathered her skirts, climbed out on unsteady legs, and almost stumbled. His arm came near her waist, paused, and withdrew when she found her balance. Across the courtyard, beneath the high arch of the infirmary colonnade, an old healer in crimson wool watched them with unreadable eyes. She touched two fingers to her brow in formal greeting, then to Arabella's belly in blessing. The bond tightened again. Not pain this time, but insistence, a low thrum beneath skin and bone that made every instinct sharpen. Arabella turned, and Owen turned with her. For one suspended moment, noise receded, cold receded, politics receded, and the two of them stood locked in a gaze that felt like standing at the edge of a precipice and recognizing home at the bottom of the fall. The old healer crossed the courtyard first, moving with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen kings bleed and lived long enough not to be impressed by rank. "Inside," she said, voice low and clipped. "Wind like this stiffens wounds. Lady Arabella, I am healer Myera. You can refuse any hand in this room, including mine." The permission in that sentence struck almost as sharply as the cold. Arabella nodded once and followed beneath the infirmary arch, aware of Owen half a pace behind and deliberately not crowding her. Warmth met them at the threshold, heavy with rosemary smoke, boiled linen, and iron-rich broth. The chamber was stone, practical, lined with cots and shelves of dried plants bound in twine. No silk, no ceremony, just work meant to keep bodies alive. Mara gestured toward a screened alcove with a narrow bed and a chair. "You need the welts cleaned before fever has ideas. You need food before you faint. You need sleep, even if your mind objects." "My satchel stays with me," Arabella said immediately. "It does," Owen answered before Mara could. "No one touches it unless you say so." She set it on the bed, still within reach, and gripped the edge of the mattress as Mara prepared water. Owen remained near the doorway, shoulders rigid, as if every instinct in him pulled forward and discipline held him back by force. He watched the room. He watched her. He did not close in. When Mara asked her to turn, Arabella managed 2 slow breaths before linen brushed her back and memory crashed over her with brutal clarity. Locked corridor, hands on her arms, the scrape of rope, the captain's bored voice counting strikes. Her pulse spiked, vision narrowing. She twisted away, knocking a basin that shattered against a stone. Water spread dark across the floor. "No," she heard herself say, though no one had grabbed her. "No, do not pin me. Do not. Arabella." Owen's voice cut through the panic without force. "Look at me." She did, because command had weight in his tone, but this command offered ground instead of taking it. "You are in Starfall Infirmary," he said, each word placed carefully. "Door open. Healer in front of you. No restraints. No one will hold you down. Do you want space, or do you want me closer?" The question halted the spiral long enough for thought to return in jagged pieces. She swallowed. Closer. Not touching. He stepped to the foot of the bed and stopped exactly there. Done. Mara crouched to collect shards without commentary. "Panic is pain with memory attached," she muttered. "No shame in it. We try again when you choose." Arabella pressed trembling fingers to her lips, then let her hand fall. "Now, before I lose nerve." Mara cleaned the first welt with a cloth soaked in bitter herbs. Arabella hissed, and across from her Owen's jaw tightened hard enough to show the hinge of bone. On the third bandage, Mara's wrists began to shake from age and strain. Owen noticed at once. "Let me," he said. Mara eyed him. "Kings make poor nurses." "Then I will be a poor one quietly." She snorted, surrendered the cloth, and moved aside. Owen approached only after Arabella nodded. He knelt behind her at the bedside, broad hands suddenly uncertain around linen strips and salve. The uncertainty startled her more than his strength had. He moved like a warrior diffusing a trap, asking before each contact. "Here? Yes. Pressure? Less. Like this? She closed her eyes against another sting. That. Keep that. He learned quickly. By the fourth bandage his hands had steadied, and the wraps lay clean, even, protective without pulling skin. He never commented on the marks, never asked who swung the lash. He treated injury as fact, not spectacle. When the last knot was tied, he stood and turned away first, giving her privacy to pull her gown back into place. Mara set a bowl of broth near her knees and a packet of crushed iron leaf beside it. "You drink all of this," the healer said. "Then those herbs in hot water. Child needs your blood strong." She flicked her gaze at Owen. "And you stop standing like a siege tower. Sit before you frighten the patient again." "I am not frightened," Arabella said, then took one spoonful, felt her stomach roll, and corrected herself with a weary exhale. "I am a little frightened." A faint, brief smile touched Owen's mouth. "I have that effect at council tables too." It was dry enough to be almost funny. The corner of her own mouth threatened to lift, and then did, despite everything. Night deepened outside the narrow windows. One by one, the other cots emptied as treated guards returned to duty. Mara left a fresh lamp and went to her quarters with a promise to check fever at dawn. A maid brought extra blankets and, at Owen's order, no sedative tea. Arabella heard that and looked up sharply. He met her stare. "I will not have you waking drugged in a strange room." The knot behind her ribs loosened by a fraction. Sleep did not come cleanly. Each time she drifted, a hoofbeat became pursuit. A creaking beam became a bolted door. Near midnight, she startled awake with a hand over her throat, breath sawing. Owen was still there, not in the chair now, but seated on the floor beside her bed, back against stone, forearms resting on bent knees like a sentry refusing relief. "You should rest," she whispered. "I am." "That is not rest. It is enough." Silence settled, companionable in a way she had forgotten was possible. Wind rasped along the outer walls. Somewhere far below, wolves answered one another across the ridges in long, low calls that sounded less like threat than belonging. When she could not settle, Owen began speaking into the dark, voice roughened to a near murmur. Not politics, not strategy. Stars. "My mother taught me names when storms kept us indoors," he said. "Winter Crown, Hunter's Belt, the Seven Sisters." She said kings get lost because they stare at maps and forget the sky. Arabella watched lamplight move across his profile as he recited constellations like vows. The rhythm steadied her breathing. She cried once, quietly, when he reached a cluster her husband used to point out over Cinder Ford. Owen paused just long enough to hear the catch in her chest, then kept going without acknowledging the tears, offering dignity where pity would have made her break. Inside her, thought ran in raw present tense, tired and startlingly clear. "You are not safe because one man is kind for one night. You know that. But you are also not trapped in that corridor anymore." He asks. He waits. He gives choice even when he could take obedience and call it order. Do not mistake relief for surrender. Do not mistake the bond for permission. Yet this is real. Your back is bandaged by a king who did not use your pain to own you. Your child is quiet. Not from fear, from ease. You have been braced for betrayal so long that gentleness feels like a trick. And still, your body is learning a new answer, one careful breath at a time. By late afternoon the next day, after broth, herbs, and a few fractured hours of sleep, she walked into the council chamber with fresh linen beneath her black dress, and Owen's escort flanking the doors. The room was built for intimidation. High beams dark with age, a circular table of black oak, banners of 12 territories hanging like judgment from iron hooks. Alphas filled carved seats, heavy with fur and silver, while clerks waited at the perimeter with wax tablets ready. Arabella took the place Owen had ordered prepared at his right, half a step behind the line of his shoulder yet fully visible to every eye in the room. 3 territorial alphas did not bother hiding their displeasure. The first, broad-faced with a scar crossing his lip, leaned back and said, "Before we proceed to tribunal scheduling, we address the widow. Her condition complicates succession. Containment until lineage confirmation is prudent." Containment. A polished word for a cage. The second tapped his rings against the table. "No insult intended, Your Majesty, but carrying another male's child while claiming sanctuary under crown creates a precedent. Precedents become problems." The third smiled without warmth. "The border packs whisper already. Blood curse talk. Feral issue, unstable mother, temple scandal. Keep her in guarded quarters until the birth and the noise dies." Arabella felt old humiliation rise, hot and acidic. She opened her mouth, but Owen stood first. Power hit the chamber like a pressure front. No blow landed, no claw unsheathed, yet the weight of his alpha aura slammed outward in a widening arc that made lamps shudder and drove all 3 men to one knee beside their chairs with shocked snarls. Even clerks at the wall bowed reflexively, palms flat on tablets to keep from dropping them. Owen's voice came cold and resonant. "You will not speak of her as inventory in my hall." The scar-lipped alpha strained against the invisible force. "You overreach." "I have not begun to." He shifted one step, placing his body between Arabella and the kneeling men, but he held his left hand open toward her without looking back. Palm up, and offered anchor, rather than a command. She stared at that hand for 1 heartbeat, then 2, then set her fingers lightly against it. His posture eased by a degree that only she seemed to notice. The second alpha forced his chin up. "Our concern is legal, not personal." "Then hear law," Owen said. "By sovereign sanctuary, any insult to Arabella Darkhollow is insult to crown authority and protected witness. By ancient dual code, any male here who questions her honor may rise, name terms, and test his claim in the ring." No one rose. From the far end of the table, Council Elder Hadrick gave a dry, contemptuous laugh. "Widows have always brought weakness to ruling houses. Sentiment does not alter history." Owen turned his head slowly toward him, and something ancient looked out through his eyes, not light, not spectacle, but predator certainty honed to a razor edge. When he bared his fangs, the chamber went breathless. "She crossed a killing field pregnant and unbroken," he said. "If that is weakness, none of you would survive strength." Silence held for several long beats. Then one clerk, hands shaking, resumed writing. The scratch of stylus on wax sounded louder than thunder. Arabella stood very still, pulse racing for a different reason now. Protection had always come with terms in her life. Protection meant signatures that erased her, rooms she could not leave, men who called control devotion. Owen's defense had not erased her voice. It had made space for it. That distinction was non-trivial, and it landed deep. She stepped forward from behind his shoulder before fear could reclaim her tongue. "You want lineage?" she said to the chamber. "Set your tests. You want evidence? You will have it under Oathstone. You want me hidden because rumor feels cleaner than truth?" Denied. The third alpha began. "You are in no state to dictate." "I am in exactly the state required," Arabella cut in, surprising herself with the steel in her own tone. "Alive, witnessed, willing to name names." Hadrick's mouth tightened. "Boldness is not legitimacy." "Neither is cowardice," she replied. A few heads turned. One of the younger alphas lowered his gaze, chastened. Another, from the mountain territories, gave the smallest nod of respect. Owen lowered his aura at last, and the kneeling men rose stiffly. Pride bruised more than bodies. "Tribunal convenes on the full moon," he said. "Until then, Lady Arabella moves freely within fortress bounds under royal guard. Any attempt to confine, drug, or coerce her will be treated as conspiracy against Crown witness. Minutes will reflect this exactly. The chief clerk swallowed and bowed. They will, my king. The meeting fractured into procedural objections and reluctant compliance, but the axis had shifted. Arabella felt it in the room's new geometry, in who avoided her eyes and who met them, in the way words like widow and burden no longer passed unchallenged as neutral facts. When council finally adjourned, Owen did not steer her, did not herd her toward a side door. He simply waited at the edge of the chamber while she gathered her own papers and reclaimed the satchel from the guard table herself. Only then did he speak, pitched for her alone. You do not have to thank me. I was not going to. A faint curve touched his mouth. Good. They walked into the corridor side by side, evening light slanting through arrow-slit windows in bands of pale gold. Arabella looked ahead, then down at the open space between their hands. After a moment that felt both small and monumental, she closed that space herself, fitting her fingers into his palm for 3 steady steps before letting go again. Not a surrender, not yet, but the first deliberate lowering of a wall she had built to survive. The warmth of his palm lingered in hers after she let go, a faint imprint that followed them down the corridor like a second pulse. Arabella kept her chin level, unwilling to let anyone watching read softness into a gesture she barely understood herself, when bootsteps broke into a run from the stairwell and a young courier skidded to a halt before Owen, breathing hard. My king. Gate report. A border rider came in from Cinder Ford, dead by the time he reached the inner ward. He carried this under his breastplate. He held out a narrow oilskin packet stamped with dark hollow wax and, over it, a second seal pressed in black resin. Starfall. Fenris's branch mark, unmistakable in its hooked crescent. Arabella felt the floor tilt beneath her for one sharp beat. Owen took the packet, then looked to her, waiting for permission before breaking either seal. She nodded. Open it where there are witnesses. They changed direction without another word, moving to a records chamber off the main hall where 2 clerks, a guard captain, and healer Myra could be summoned within moments. The room smelled of dust, beeswax, and cold ink. Owen placed the packet on the table and read every face before he cut the cord. Procedure. Witness law. No private tampering. Inside lay 3 items: a lock of dark hair tied with faded blue thread, a folded page in Fenris's hand, and a temple tally slip marked with payment disbursements to unnamed officials. Arabella recognized the blue thread first. She had tied it herself the spring before her husband died, laughing while he complained that she treated his braid like a child's festival ribbon. The world narrowed to parchment. My dearest niece. The note began in elegant script that had signed condolences over fresh ash. You continue to misunderstand the scale of your mistake. Withdraw accusation and accept guardianship terms before tribunal, or I will remove every reason you have left to resist. The next courier can carry more than hair. Do not test me. The child will be taken and corrected if bloodline safety demands it. No signature was needed, but Fenris had added one anyway, looping and proud. Mara cursed under her breath. The captain's knuckles whitened around the back of a chair. Owen said nothing for 3 heartbeats, and the silence was worse than a shout. When he spoke, his voice had gone flat with contained violence. Record this exactly. Threat against protected witness and unborn heir. Coercion, extortion, admission of intent to interfere with succession. One clerk swallowed and began writing, stylus trembling over wax. Arabella did not cry. Grief was there, old and raw, but rage rose cleaner now, like winter air after smoke. She lifted the temple slip. The entries were coded in donation language, but the amounts were too precise to be devotional. One payment matched the night she heard talk of sedation in the keep corridor. Another was dated 6 hours before the choosing opened. He bought access, she said. Not just muscle, process. He paid people who control doors and signatures. Owen met her gaze. And he expects fear to make you vanish before full moon. Then he still does not know me. The captain cleared his throat. My king, with your leave, we can circulate his handwriting to all watch posts and detain any courier carrying his crest. Do it. Quietly. Owen tapped the note once. And send word to the Temple High Archive that this slip is now evidence in Crown inquiry. If records are altered after this bell, every keeper on duty answers for conspiracy. By the time the second bell after dusk sounded, copies of the note and tally slip had been made by both clerks, sealed under Mayera's witness mark, and split 3 ways: one packet in the royal vault, one under Temple seal, one in Arabella's satchel. The lock of hair was wrapped in clean linen and set in a cedar box at Arabella's request, not for sentiment, but identification. Physical proof, catalogued and witnessed, could no longer be dismissed as hysteria. When the room finally emptied, Owen remained by the table, palms braced on worn oak, head bowed as if listening to a storm only he could hear. Arabella moved closer, then stopped a careful step away. He wanted me to break when I saw that, she said. He wanted me to kill without process, Owen answered. So he could paint this as personal vengeance and drag council procedure into the mud. She studied him in profile. You are furious. Yes. Thank you for not making it mine to manage. His mouth tightened, almost a smile, almost grief. I have had years to learn what power does badly when it confuses protection with possession. The bond between them hummed low and insistent, not pain, not peace, a current asking questions neither of them could answer quickly. Arabella stared at the note again and felt contradictory truths collide in real time. I am still married in my bones to a man whose hair arrived in a threat packet. I am still carrying his child, still waking with fear in my throat, still walking halls where people weigh me like disputed land. And yet when Owen stands near, my breathing eases before I grant permission for it. I do not trust this pull. I do not trust timing that cruel. I do not trust my own hunger for steadiness. Wanting can be used against you. Need can be weaponized. But he keeps asking instead of taking, keeps building law around me instead of walls, and each mercy lands in places I had boarded shut. If I lean, even 1 inch, will I lose myself again, or find a self I had to bury to survive? Owen straightened. We should eat. Then we prepare your deposition for full moon tribunal tonight while details are fresh. Tonight? Fenris just moved from rumor to direct threat. Delay helps him. She nodded. Then we do it tonight. A knock interrupted them. The chief clerk re-entered with a fresh tablet and a tight expression. Additional development. Counsel Elder Hadrick has filed emergency petition under taint statute. He requests provisional containment of Lady Arabella and a pre-tribunal vote on termination of succession rights if blood curse allegations are substantiated. The words landed like ice water. Owen's gaze went glacial. On what evidence? A statement from Regent Fenris's factors and 2 sworn declarations from temple attendants who claim the child's scent is unstable. Arabella laughed once, sharp and humorless. My child has become a debate topic for men who have never stood within 10 paces of me. The clerk hesitated. There is more. Hadrick asks that your satchel be surrendered to neutral custody. Owen took the tablet, read it, and handed it to Arabella so she could see the exact language. No shielding, no editing. File our response, he told the clerk. Denied in full pending Oathstone hearing. Any attempt to enforce containment before ruling will be treated as unlawful detention. When they were alone again, Arabella exhaled slowly through her nose. He is synchronizing pressure points. Public rumor. Legal trap. Personal terror. Yes, Owen said. Fenris is dangerous because he understands institutions. He rarely needs to swing the first blow himself. She folded Hadrick's petition and set it beside Fenris's note. Then we stop reacting in separate rooms. I give deposition now. I name the courier and captain who planned sedation. I submit ledger copies and this tally slip under oath. If Hadrick wants procedure, I will drown him in it. The corner of Owen's mouth lifted, grim and admiring. That is very close to what I was going to propose. Good. We are aligned for once. For once? She gave him a tired look. Do not become smug. A brief, unexpected laugh escaped him, rough and low. Noted. An hour later, in a smaller hearing chamber lit by 6 oil lamps and 1 brazier, Arabella sat at a stone table while 2 scribes recorded her statement line by line. Owen remained across from her, close enough to anchor, far enough not to crowd, while Captain Ilian stood by the door and Mayera observed as medical witness. Arabella spoke for nearly 40 minutes without pause. The forged guardianship documents, the corridor conversation about sedation, the archive folio entries tied to Cinder Ford, the names she had overheard, the courier's reed-thin hands, the sequence of her flight. When her throat roughened, Owen slid a cup of water toward her and withdrew his hand immediately after, the same pattern of offer and retreat that had begun to feel dangerously precious. The second scribe finished the final line, pressed a seal, and said, "Testimony complete pending oathstone corroboration at full moon." At that exact moment, the fortress alarm bell rang once, then twice, not the outer wall cadence. Inner ward. Captain Ilian was already moving. "Stay here." A third bell split the air, followed by shouts from the corridor and the crack of something heavy striking stone. Owen was on his feet before the echo died, shifting into command with terrifying speed. "Ilian, secure the witness. Mara with her. Scribes, take records and move to vault stair now." The door burst inward hard enough to slam against the wall. 2 men in Temple Porter livery rushed in, faces veiled, blades short and curved for close quarters. Not random raiders, targeted insertion. One went straight for the table packets. The other feinted toward Owen, then pivoted for Arabella. Ilian met the first intruder's shoulder to chest and drove him into the brazier stand. Hot coals scattered, smoke surging as the lamp nearest the door shattered. Mara shoved Arabella behind the stone chair with startling force for an older woman. Owen caught the second attacker's wrist mid-strike, twisted and sent the blade skittering across the floor. But 2 more shadows moved in the corridor beyond, and one hurled a hook line through the doorway that snagged the satchel strap before Arabella could lock it around her arm. "No!" She lunged, fingers closing on oiled leather as the line jerked taut. For one suspended second, she and the unseen assailant on the other end held the satchel between them, evidence packets tugging against the seam. Owen turned toward her, amber surfacing in his eyes, and the room filled with the sound of boots, breaking glass, and a 4th alarm bell beginning to ring as the strap started to tear. The strap split with a harsh rip, leather fibers snapping across Arabella's knuckles, and instinct told her to hold tighter while reason told her that being dragged into a corridor full of blades would end both her and the child. She made her choice in the same breath. Snatching the fallen curved knife from the floor, she slashed through the satchel's side seam herself. Packets, wax tablets, and folded pages spilled across stone like a burst deck of cards. Too many pieces for one hook line to steal at once. The line yanked the ruined satchel out through the doorway, but the evidence stayed in the room. "Leave the bag, take the records," she shouted at the scribes. "All of them. Vault stair now." One scribe froze, staring at the smoke and the men grappling by the brazier. Arabella slammed her palm on the table hard enough to jolt him back into motion. "Move." Ilian drove his elbow into the first intruder's throat and hauled him backward by his collar, while Owen pinned the second attacker against the wall with a forearm across his chest. Teeth bared, control hanging by a thread. In the corridor, another infiltrator lunged low, caught Arabella's skirts, and tried to yank her down. Pain lanced across her back as she stumbled against the chair Mara had shoved behind her. Mara swung a metal ladle from the medicine tray straight into the attacker's temple. "You touch her again and lose the hand," the healer snapped. The man reeled, then recovered fast and came for Arabella with a short blade in reverse grip. She had no room to run and no time to call for rescue. She kicked the brazier stand with all the force in her hips. Coals exploded across the floor between them, bright and hissing, and he cursed, hopping back as heat licked through his boot leather. By the time the fifth alarm bell rolled through the inner ward, the hearing chamber had become a knot of smoke, shouts, and scraping steel. "Seal the corridor!" Owen roared. Too late. A new figure stepped through the haze in temple porter robes, hood low, gait familiar in the worst way. He peeled back the veil with deliberate calm, and Fenris Starfall smiled at his niece as if arriving for supper. "Arabella," he said softly, always dramatic. The room seemed to narrow around his voice. Owen shifted toward him, but two remaining infiltrators crossed blades in front of the king, forcing him to engage. Fenris used that heartbeat to close the distance and seize Arabella by the wrist, dragging her against him with a knife angled just beneath her ribs, carefully placed to threaten without puncturing. "No heroics," he told Owen. "You move. She bleeds." Owen stopped, every muscle locked. "Let her go." Fenris laughed under his breath. "And surrender the only leverage worth carrying?" Arabella could feel his pulse through his sleeve, steady and pleased. He believed he had restored the old geometry, men deciding, her surviving if useful. The fear was real, sharp enough to make her knees tremble, but rage rose higher. "You sent my husband's hair in a threat packet," she said, voice hoarse and clear. "You bribed temple officials. You sent men into a royal hearing with witness records on the table. You are done hiding behind titles." His grip tightened. "You still think words can save you?" "No," she said. "Law can." She drove her heel down on his instep and twisted, not to break free completely, just enough to shift the knife angle off her center line. He swore and jerked her back. Pain flashed along her side where the blade nicked cloth and skin, shallow but hot. The child kicked hard, and a fierce protective clarity slammed through her body. "I do not vanish tonight. I do not wait for permission to exist. He has spent months teaching me to fear rooms full of witnesses. This time, the room will witness him." Arabella grabbed Fenris's knife hand with both of hers, turned into the pressure instead of away, and bit down on his thumb web until he flinched. In that flinch, she ripped free, stumbled forward, and slammed her bleeding palm onto the center oath tile set into the chamber floor. The stone drank blood and flashed. A low pulse rolled outward, not light alone, but force, a concussive wave that shoved smoke from the room and threw the nearest attacker backward into the door frame. Arabella's vision flared white at the edges, heat pulsed beneath her skin, and when she lifted her head, everyone was staring. Her eyes had gone white gold in the reflected firelight. Fenris staggered one step back, disbelief cracking his composure. "You were cursed not to shift. Seems your information is stale." She pressed her bloodied hand harder to the tile. "By witness law and maternal blood right, I call immediate moon hearing. No removal of evidence, no private custody, no adjournment." The tile brightened again, old magic answering old words. In the corridor, guards who had hesitated at conflicting commands suddenly dropped to one knee, bound by statute older than any council faction. Owen disarmed the man blocking him with one brutal twist and crossed to Arabella's side, not touching until she nodded. "Can you stand?" "Yes." "Then stand with me." Fenris looked from the glowing tile to the kneeling guards and finally to Owen, calculation racing behind his eyes. You would let a hysterical widow trigger sovereign protocol in a smoke-filled side room? Arabella laughed, breathless and raw. Call me hysterical again in front of the council. He tried to bolt for the corridor. Ilian tackled him at the threshold, and 3 royal guards piled in, wrenching his arms behind his back and stripping his concealed second blade. Fenris thrashed, then went still when Owen's voice cut through the chamber. Alive, Owen ordered. He answers publicly. They marched him into the inner tribunal ring under the open moon, alarms still sounding from the towers. Word moved faster than runners in a fortress under attack. Council elders arrived in hastily thrown cloaks, clerks clutching tablets, temple adjudicators pale and furious, and half the inner ward lined the outer arc as witness by necessity and law. 3 days had passed since Arabella first entered the fortress, and she stood now in the center circle with soot on her sleeves, blood drying on her palm, and no intention of stepping back. The chief clerk raised his tablet with shaking hands. Emergency moon hearing called under maternal blood right by Lady Arabella Darkhollow, witnessed by activated oath tile and sovereign assent. Charges to be read. He read everything. Threats against protected witness, bribery of temple officers, conspiracy to alter choosing procedure, attempted theft of crown evidence, assault inside royal hearing, ordered ambush at Cinder Ford. Fenris interrupted twice, scoffing, then snarling as each item was supported by physical exhibits placed on a stone plinth. The threat note, the tally slip, the copied ledger pages, and 2 captured attackers identifying his factor by name. A temple archivist, dragged from bed and still in night robes, confirmed the black resin payments matched accounts now frozen under seal. 2 attendants are already detained, she said, voice tight. Their marks appear on this disbursement line. External denial had become external confirmation, and the shift in the crowd was palpable. Fenris straightened despite the restraints, blooded his lip from Ilian's tackle, arrogance returning as a final weapon. All this theater over a frightened widow. You cannot prove intent from coin and gossip. I acted to secure succession from contamination. Arabella stepped forward until only 1 guard stood between them. Say contamination again. Say it while looking at me. He did. Contamination. She held up her bleeding palm. Then witness this. She turned to the oath stone set at the ring's edge, smeared her blood across its surface, and spoke Fenris's own threat lines exactly as written. The stone flared and released a memory echo into the air. Fenris's voice, crisp and unmistakable, from the note itself and from prior recorded oath correspondence linked to his seal, ordering compliance and threatening to take the child by force if she testified. Gasps broke from the outer ring. Heydrich, who had petitioned for her containment, went chalk pale. Fenris's composure finally fractured. Forgery. The temple adjudicator shook his head. Oathstone resonance rejects forged blood-keyed voice marks. This is authentic. Owen's perspective narrowed to 2 points. Arabella standing unbowed under moonlight, and Fenris still breathing. He had promised process, and process now stood complete. Each step witnessed, each trap Fenris built turned back against him. The council vote came one by one, reluctant in some mouths, grim in others, but unanimous by the end. Guilty, said Heydrich, voice barely audible. Guilty, echoed the mountain alpha who had once nodded to Arabella. The chief clerk swallowed hard. Unanimous verdict, rank stripped, regency void, sentence under treason clause and blood murder statute. Fenris spat at Arabella's feet. You were always breeding stock, niece. She did not flinch. I was never yours to spend. He shifted then, desperate and reckless, bones snapping into battle wolf form despite the chain at his wrists. Guards fell back as the chain broke, and the beast lunged for Arabella in one last bid to make her death his legacy. Owen met him mid-air. The impact drove both wolves across the ringstones. It was fast, violent, and unmistakably final in intent. Owen fought to finish, not display. Two crushing passes, a flank feint, then his jaws locked high on Fenris's throat and forced him down. Fenris clawed once at stone, breath rattled, and stilled under Owen's weight. Silence hit the ring like snowfall. Owen shifted back to human form on one knee, chest heaving, blood at his mouth that was not his own. He looked first to Arabella, waiting for her signal as he had in every decisive moment that night. She lifted her chin, voice carrying to the far wall. Let the record show Fenris Starfall died convicted, witnessed, and named for what he was. The chief clerk wrote it down. Torches snapped in the wind. Somewhere beyond the ring, dawn's first gray touched the eastern battlements, and Arabella felt the tight knot behind her ribs loosen for the first time since Cinder Ford. Not healed, not finished, but broken open in the direction of freedom. The bells stopped one by one, and the silence that followed felt earned rather than empty. In that hush, the chief clerk knelt at the edge of the ring and asked for disposition orders, while wax on his tablet was still soft enough to take law. Arabella stepped to the evidence plinth before anyone could speak for her. Read each item aloud. He did, voice steadying as process reclaimed the night. Threat letter in Fenris Starfall's hand, temple disbursement slip in black resin account code, ledger pages recovered from Dark Hollow archive, oath correspondence authenticated by blood key resonance, petition for provisional containment filed by Elder Hadrick, torn satchel recovered from corridor assault. Threat letter, tally slip, and ledger pages go to Crown Vault and Temple High Archive under mirrored seals, Arabella said. No single keeper holds all three. The containment petition goes into open record with denial attached, then burned at first light with the forged guardianship decrees. Hadrick flinched, old pride cracking. Lady Arabella, She turned to him, exhausted and unyielding. You called me weakness in a full chamber. If you have something to add it to the record. His gaze dropped. I received sworn declarations from attendants who have now confessed payment. I did not verify before filing. That failure is mine. The clerk scratched every word into wax. Captain Elion approached with two guards and a hooded man whose wrists were bound in temple cord. Reed thin hands, the courier from her corridor memory. Arabella recognized him instantly, and he recognized her with the flat terror of someone who had run out of patrons. Name, Ilion ordered. Sorel. He confessed quickly once the oath stone was touched. Sedation arrangement, ring placement manipulation, message traffic between Fenris's factors and two temple attendants already detained. He gave no grand motive, no clever speech, only fear and coin. Arabella listened without blinking. When he was done, she said, Mark him for exile beyond temple jurisdictions after testimony closes. He wanted shadows. Give him distance instead. By sunset that same day, 3 hearings had closed, and every packet had changed hands under witness, exactly as ordered. When the execution pyres burned down to red seams in the dark, Arabella walked back to the moonlit stone circle where the choosing had broken her open. The temple clearing was quieter now, stripped of spectators and perfume and whispering judgment. Nightwind moved through cedar boughs, carrying ash, pine resin, and the faint metallic scent of old rain on stone. Owen waited inside the ring, unarmored, black shirt open at the throat, as if he had come not as king, but as the man who had sat on a cold infirmary floor naming stars so she could breathe. He did not step forward immediately. He watched her cross the circle and let her choose the distance. She stopped a pace away. Moonlight silvered the scar at his jaw and lit amber beneath his irises. I did not come because law requires this, she said. Law already did its work. His voice was low, rough with restraint. Then why did you come? Because I am done being claimed by fear. Her fingers shook once, then steadied. Because when you touch me, my child settles. Because you asked every time when others ordered. Because I want this, and wanting it no longer feels like betrayal. Owen closed his eyes for a brief beat, as if absorbing a wound and a blessing at once. When he looked at her again, the predator in him was present but leashed by reverence. Arabella Darkhollow, he said, each syllable deliberate. May I mark you as my mate? She lifted her chin and bared the junction of neck and shoulder in clear, deliberate trust. Yes, Owen. Mark me. His hands came up to frame her face, warm and steady despite the tremor he could not quite hide. He leaned in slowly enough for refusal, for retreat, for choice. She did not retreat. His teeth found the mating point with controlled force. Pain flashed bright and immediate, a clean strike that made her breath catch. Then heat rushed in behind it, not burning, not consuming, but flooding, molten and golden, pouring through nerves and marrow, threading from the bite into her chest and downward into her belly where the child answered with one strong kick. The bond opened like a locked gate giving way. She felt him in overlapping waves. Iron discipline, old loneliness, the ache of a crown worn too long without softness, and beneath all of it a ferocious vow that had no performance in it. Owen shuddered against her skin, voice breaking into a whisper at her throat. Mine. Arabella's hands found his shoulders and held, not to steady herself, to steady both of them. Yours, she whispered back, tears hot in the cold air. The golden threads of bond light rose around their wrists, visible now, winding once, twice, then settling into a pulse that matched their breaths. Owen drew back just enough to see her face, searching for pain, for fear, for any sign he had taken more than she offered. She smiled through tears, fierce and astonished. My turn. His expression changed, fierce pride and vulnerable wonder colliding in real time. He bowed his head, exposing the pulse below his jaw. I am yours to mark. Arabella slid her hand to the nape of his neck and guided him closer. Her bite landed at his pulse point. Not savage, not tentative. A claiming answered in full. He inhaled sharply, fingers tightening at her waist, and she felt the same transformation echo through him. Pain into heat, heat into a deep, resonant calm that settled through muscle and bone like a storm finally grounding. Their bond surged once, hard enough to make the standing stones hum, then stabilized into a steady thrum beneath skin. Words moved between them in breath and heartbeat, old language and new promise braided together. Mine, she whispered against his jaw. Yours, he answered. Mate. He pressed his forehead to hers. Mate. Together, almost without planning it, they spoke the vow that had lived between them since the first night he knelt instead of taking. Seen in grief, chosen in truth, kept in all seasons. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the center of the ring that had once displayed her humiliation. Now it held witness to reciprocity. No audience needed, no crown required. Her breathing eased into his. His heartbeat slowed under her palm. The bond no longer struck like lightning. It settled like home. 3 dawns later, the great hall filled before first bell with territorial alphas, temple adjudicators, border commanders, and petitioners who had traveled through the night to watch law become visible. Braziers blazed along the walls. On the central dais stood 2 chairs of equal height. Owen took one. Arabella took the other. The chief clerk read decrees while runners carried copies to every row. Fenris's forged guardianship papers were brought out in a sealed iron tray, held up for recognition, then set alight from the temple flame. Hadric, stripped of senior voting rank for procedural misconduct, watched without speaking as the ash curled and collapsed. 2 attendants and courier Sorel were sentenced to exile under oath breach statutes, barred from temple and pack office for life. Fenris's paid factors received the same sentence at Outer Gate by noon, escorted beyond territorial markers under Ilyan's command. The dead border rider who had delivered the packet was named before the hall and granted honors at the memorial wall. Mara placed the cedar box with the blue thread lock beneath his marker until Arabella requested it later for private burial beside her first mate's cairn. Then came the new law. Arabella stood, one hand resting over her belly, and read it herself so no one could soften its edges. Sanctuary Accord Article 1. No widow, unmated mother, or rejected wolf may be coerced into claim, custody transfer, sedation, or confinement without open hearing and chosen advocate. Article 2. Maternal blood right petitions cannot be suspended by rumor. Article 3. Evidence in succession disputes must be mirrored across Crown and Temple archive. She looked across the hall, voice carrying clean to the back wall. What happened to me will not be repackaged as tradition and passed to the next woman. The Mountain Alpha rose first and bowed. Others followed, some immediate, some reluctant, but none remaining seated by the time the Moon Oath parchment was brought forward. One by one they signed the Starfall Darkhollow Accord, recognizing co-rule rather than king and consort. Owen rose last, moved beside her, and spoke without looking away from the assembly. This realm does not get her as symbol. It gets her as law. When the hall emptied and the ink dried, sunrise spilled over the palace terrace in long bands of gold. Arabella stood at the stone rail, Owen behind her, his hand covering hers over the curve of her belly. Below, banners lifted in the morning wind above a courtyard, where no one whispered widow like a verdict anymore. The bond between them ran steady and warm, neither chain nor fire, simply presence. Her child shifted once beneath their joined hands, strong and unafraid. Arabella watched light climb the battlements of a kingdom reordered by witness, and for the first time since Cinder Ford, the future arrived without teeth.